Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to today's training. Today, we are talking about how to generate 20K per month without taking sales calls. So if you're anything like me and you run a coaching program or you have some other businesses and maybe you don't love sales, I know I don't, but it's a necessary evil if you're gonna grow your business. Well, today we're going to be talking about a couple of different ways that you can actually generate sales, grow your business without actually taking sales calls yourself. Because I know that when I'm spending time doing sales calls, it takes away from the other aspects of my business that I could be doing to actually grow my business. So to help us today and to take us through this training, we got a very special guest, Jeff Lauro with Rainmaker. He's also helping me with my sales. So he's going to walk us through some some of the training that's going to help you to start generating revenue or start to think about how you can generate revenue without taking sales calls yourself. We'll also talk about a couple of different ways to do that. So Jeff, thanks for joining us today. You want to
Absolutely, man.
give a
I'm
little
excited. It's
IO on yourself, a little rundown?
yeah. I would just say that I believe everybody's been in sales and is in sales from like being a young age, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether we're selling our boss at Taco Bell to promote us to the shift manager or whatever else, we all do sales. It's just a matter of some people make that as their career choice, right? They say, hey, no, I want to become a professional salesperson. And so I think today that's what we're really going to speak about is how do you find those right people. And I've done that most of my life. And how do you find those right people, fit them into your program so that it's great for you and it's great for them, right? And that's really what the presentation's about. And I know that if we have a little bit of time, we might even take some questions later
Yeah.
on. Um,
Yeah.
awesome, man.
And when we started talking about this training, what I was kind of thinking, what we talked about is, I'm a coach. I have a program. I've gotten now, luckily, to the point where, I can start to hire a closer. But previously, I had purchased a program to do that. And I realized very quickly that I had just wasted my money because there were some prerequisites that I needed to have in place to be able to actually support a closer. So that's some of the things we're going to be talking about today. And we're not only going to be talking about, hiring as closer. There's another aspect, and we're going to do a two-part to this series where we'll talk about the other way to do it next week. So if you want to go ahead and we'll share your screen here, and we'll go ahead and get started with the training.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously today's about generating 20,000 plus in revenue without taking sales calls. Really, it's about effectively building like a result-driven sales system and being proactive with it. I think that's the key element is being proactive. Making some decisions on how you proceed. There's not necessarily a right or wrong. It's really right for you or more right for you based on your company and what your goals are. So you just mentioned about the idea of like two different paths or other ways to do it. So there's typically your sales reps model, which is when you actually bring in a professional. This is literally what they do for a living. They practice it. They've been doing it. They constantly are getting better. They're perpetual students of the sales game, shall we say. And then the other model is that one to many, and the one to many model is fantastic as well. It allows you to consider different types of triggers and events that take place. So I thought we'd just go through some of the positives and negatives of both one, and ultimately, in a perfect world, you'd be able to do both of these. And I've got a little twist for you in the slide that I think would be kind of fun too. So, we look at just having sales reps, right? You want to make sure that you have a product or price point that's typically greater than $3,000. Some of the benefits and the real pros of it is that it is a lot more personal. When you jump on one-on-one in a Zoom, you get a chance to know an individual, you get to know their business. There's more impact typically because you can make it a bit of a educational opportunity to really share some insight and really give them a lot of value, but more personalized value, of course. You can do a wide price range. It's a lot easier on a one-on-one to do a higher price point. So if you do have a ticket of 7 grand, 10 grand, maybe even a mastermind, 25, $30,000, that one-on-one sale is going to probably make more sense for that than typically doing a one-to-many approach. I believe there's a bit less risk with that. If right now something happens and my power goes out, I can jump back on. It's no big deal. I've had one person. But in a one-to-many, situation where you've got a room full of 20, 30, 40 people, you spent a ton of money to get them in there, and all of a sudden you have some tech issues, you can lose an entire opportunity. To me, that's a bit of risk because you spend a lot of money to get people in the room, and if you have an issue, it could really blow the whole sale. So also found the system you can systematize it. You can do the follow up a little bit easier when it's one on one, and definitely it's a lot more personal. The negatives, though, of course, is if you're doing one on one, you can only have one individual, one salesperson working with one potential buyer, right? You do get some no shows, and when it's again, you've blocked out the time, you've got an hour set aside, and they don't show. You literally have your closer, which that's your sales rep, sitting there for an hour with not anything to do. And of course, it is dependent on the skill set of the rep, which is, I know, part of the reason we're figuring out, how do we help coaches have sales reps if they don't like sales? And then, and more people, more problems, right? The bigger your team, the more issues you have.
Mm-hmm.
One to many model is great though, because when you are
Just to be clear, when
yeah,
we talk
sure.
about one to many, we're talking about like challenges, potentially live events, and people do definitely sell very high ticket in live event situation. But just so we're clear with everybody, this is master classes, challenges, those types of things.
Absolutely, 100%. And typically, those can be evergreen, non-evergreen. It just kind of depends. But what we found is that if you're over 10,000, unless it's an actual in-person live event, that is a fairly harder number to do. But even in a live event, a lot of times people who are spending that kind of money are going to want to have that one-on-one time. They're going to want to ask questions, and it's going to be more personal to them. It is more efficient, though. I mean, if you can, have a virtual event, do a master class, you get 30, 40, 50 people in there, and you have a great price points. There's many people that will hear the education, they'll decide, hey, I want this, and they'll sign up, which is great. It is less time, of course, because you can basically do 30, 40, 50 sales calls really in 1 hour, doing the right master class or maybe over a 5-day challenge. It is cost effective in a lot of ways, because if you're doing it yourself, you're not necessarily potentially paying a commission, that type of thing. You can actually design it. In other words, you can literally craft it to specifically speak to your audience in a broad way, which is kind of cool, because if you have a lower ticket item that people will just really love to have, you can design it specifically for your audience. And it's a great technique, again, when you get to build that rapport over again, a masterclass or a 5-day event, and so forth. Then of course it's evergreen. I mean, once you do a great masterclass, great webinar, you can run it as a on-demand training, which is really good. Negatives, it's not as personal, of course. It is price sensitive. I don't know many people that'll typically spend over five, definitely not over 10,000 just sitting in a webinar masterclass. It does take lots of testing, because again, there's a different process that goes through some of the psychology when you're speaking to a group opposed to one-on-one. And then they might need a sales call anyway. So ultimately, you might do all that work that you would need a sales call anyway. And the twist I'm going to recommend is that not everybody wants to jump on camera. So if you are a solopreneur, you're a company where the person that runs the company isn't, they're a little bit more introverted, they don't like doing sales. One of the cool things is you can find a professional salesperson that can do your presentations for you. They represent your company, and they can do some of that training for you, and then they can also do their own sales calls. So it's kind of a nice twist that you don't necessarily have to do it yourself, if you want to do kind of a one-to-many model, especially if you're a bit camera shy and it's just not really your thing. So any questions about that, sales reps and the one-to-many?
I think that's pretty straightforward, but
Awesome.
let me actually make sure that I got the comments up here. All right. Oh, by the way, everybody who is watching, if you're watching on Facebook, and there is a link in the description of this post where you can click that link, and then we can see your name when you actually end up commenting, so we know who's actually talking to us. Okay. So if you see that link, go ahead and click it, and go ahead, Jeff. Got
Yeah,
the
awesome.
comments up now.
Yeah. So look, man, I think in business, it really comes down to you try to simplify to multiply. So, we want to make this training impactful. We want to have some great, information in it, but we also want to kind of simplify it. It is, a limited period of time. We're not sitting in a 3-4 day seminar, of course. So I really took 3-step process to hire that A-player commission only sales rep. So you don't have to take a sales call again. So we're going to kind of focus on the more sales rep approach. I know next week you're going to do kind of more of a one-to-many approach. So that's what today's, presentation will be about. And here's some of the key elements of that. First and foremost is, these 3 steps are pretty straightforward. You have to know your numbers, which we'll speak about that as far as what your goals are, what your KPIs are. You really want to work on having a really a revenue driven system, both on the marketing side and sales side. And then the third step's fairly easy, which is once you do the work, go make it happen. Right. I mean, that's, I think, the biggest fear that so many people have is just putting it in action and letting it, rip and roar. So those are the 3 steps, pretty straightforward. Know your numbers, create a revenue stream, and then just go do it, and you're going to test it as you go. So here's some key things that a lot of people will ask about. This is one of the big questions we get is, Jeff, when do I get a sales rep? Like, when do I hire somebody? So this is just a guideline, of course. Every business is a little bit different depending on what your offers are. But generally, when your revenue is between 50K and 200,000, it's generally going to be you as the entrepreneur along with an executive assistant. Okay. If you want to get to that point though, where you're at that 200,000 to 100 to 1 million mark, and that's where you want to be or where you want to go, then at that point you really should consider hiring a sales pro. And that allows you to allow your executive assistant to do the daily mundane things. It lets you as the entrepreneur work on the business, and it lets a professional salesperson deal with the actual selling of your program, your course, or your services, that type of thing. Once you start going to 1 million to 3 million, at that point, you might consider hiring a professional setter in addition to your sales pro or multiple sales pros. And of course, once you hit 3 million or above, there's lots of dynamics there. It depends on if you're trying to, grow the business to sell it, or if you're growing the business to run without you, those type of things. And all I would say is, when you look at this chart, is think about where you want to be. Do you want to run a 500,000 or $1 million a year machine? Do you want to have a $2-3 million machine? And then act as if you are already doing it, and then build your players around it. And of course, when you're doing it on a commission only basis, it's fairly straightforward because you're not necessarily having to take money out of the pocket to grow it, and you're bringing these professional people in to help you get to those points. So act as if you're already doing 1.5 million or 2 million, whatever your goal is, and then build the team accordingly. So any questions on that, Ron?
No, I mean, I guess the one that kind of jumps out at me is like the hiring the sales pro, the pro versus the pro setter. Like, and we'll get it. I know we get into it a little bit on some different slides. So I'll go to the next slide, and then I'll ask my questions.
Okay, awesome. Well, once you kind of know your scale points, where you want to go, really what you want to do is you want to start thinking about the incentives and the compensation. What does it actually cost to bring a professional sales rep into the organization? And first, what I'm going to say is that your A players, those sales reps that you can go to that are really going to help drive numbers, grow your business, they're typically looking to make at least 6 figures, which is a good thing, because when it's done on commission, they make money only as you as a company are making money and growing. So but you do want to kind of think, keep that in mind. If you're looking for a full-time person, make sure that you're prepared to write them those commission checks that really amount to over 6 figures. Typically it's about 10 to 25% of commission. I know it's a wide range, but part of that's based on the price point of your actual offer. The lower your price point, if you're doing a $3,000 or $4,000 offer, offering somebody 10%, 15%, it's not very much for that sales call, but there are some variables involved. How many appointments are they taking? How much time are they spending? And then I should say, when you have your setter, you typically want to do them by the hour, and a little, maybe 2 to 5% bonus for them for sales, not necessarily appointments. Or what you can do is you can just give them a pure commission. And if you get a really good closer, I know that's a term that people use for it, but if you get a great sales rep, a lot of times they'll set their own appointments. So if they're setting their own appointments and they're doing their own sale, again, sometimes that'll offer for a little bit higher, commission amount. And then you want to think about a bonus. At the end of the day, one of the hardest thing to do in any business is when you hire somebody is any kind of turnover. And so once you find a great sales rep, man, keep them happy. You give them a nice bonus based either on volume. It could be percentage based, meaning if they are closing more than 15% of their sales calls, those type of things, you give a bonus. A hybrid's always best. And I love to do a quarterly or yearly bonus to kind of keep longevity. And what I mean by that is, at the end of a quarter, if you hit some targets, give them an extra couple $1,000s as a bonus if it fits in your model. And that gives them something to look forward to. And of course, it requires them also to still be with the company to typically get those bonuses. So when you find a great closer, you have a great relationship, it's an awesome way to keep them loyal and also really benefit them and bless them by giving them some bonuses based on the performance of the company. So that's some of the incentives and the compensation side of hiring a sales rep.
Got it. Yeah, and I think that's pretty important. Like, especially if you're going to find somebody good, they're trying to make a living too. So you have to be able to support that rep, both either with the commission you're paying or the definitely the amount of leads that we're going to talk about this, the amount of appointments that are being set, plus the price of the actual product. So I know it's on your next slide. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the biggest keys to taking that, jump to actually hire a professional salesperson is making sure you have your house in order, right? The reality is that when you do hire somebody and they're going to be relying on you, there's a level of responsibility as an owner that you're bringing somebody on, they're relying on you for their income. So if you're thinking about, doing a full-time individual, you want to make sure that your house is in order. You have a predictable and repeatable system for booking sales calls. You want to be generating, minimum 15 sales calls a week. And that's going to give you a full-time sales rep. Now, there are scenarios that I've seen, and it's very possible, and I've helped some, where they can maybe deal with a part-time salesperson for now, and that's okay too, because there are some amazing professionals out there that will do part-time for certain companies, and they're absolutely pros at what they do, and they can kind of handle working between two companies. So, some considerations for that, of course, but it is important to think that you should have about 15 sales calls, preferably 20 calls a week would be ideal. That way, it gives them time to take calls, but also gives them time for follow up. And remember, not everyone's going to show. So, 15 sales calls, depending on your show rate, they might actually be speaking maybe 7 to 10 actual people. And so, the more calls you can get, the better. And the other reason for it, and this is kind of a little bit of a sports analogy here. If you ever played, golf or played baseball, anytime you pick up a golf club and you hit a ball, obviously, it's fun. You can make it happen. If you don't do it for about 6 months, though, Ron, well, you know what happens? You're a bit rusty, right?
Mm,
So if you get a salesperson, you're only giving 2, 3, 4 calls a week. What happens is there's a lot of that kind of sales rust, shall we say, that
mm.
kind of builds up. Whereas if you're keeping them busy on a bunch of calls, they're going to be staying fresh. It's going to be fresh in their mind. It's also going to keep them motivated. So something to keep in mind. The other part about keeping your house in order is that your offer price, right? You really want to be $5,000 or more. And, this is a little, for your audience to kind of consider, is your pricing where it really needs to be right now? So many people, well, they just undervalue the value they bring in their product, and they many times underprice it. And we'll talk a bit more about that. But you should really ask yourself, am I priced properly? Am I really delivering a result? And if so, am I undercharging? Because you'd be surprised how many times I find that in organizations. Next would be your SOPs, making sure that you have your standard operating procedures. Exactly. Once you have somebody come into your world and you're doing the work, are they getting the emails? Is the sales rep, acknowledging in his calendar that he's getting it? Is he, is the Zoom links proper and correct and that type of thing? Are they going in the pipeline? Are they putting in notes? Are they, doing all the different aspects that are important that you have to do, because you want to track every detail of this, especially when you're outsourcing it, because you're relying on somebody else a bit for your income as an owner. And of course, the technology stack, you're going to make sure you have that really dialed in, your CRMs, your Zooms, your phone, your emails, and you want to try to control those things. Okay, Ron, if it's possible, give them an email with your company name. Right. Give them a phone that is through your CRM or through your system. Let them have a Zoom account where you can record the calls and they're accessible in your account. Also, I know it's costs a few bucks, but get the pro level if you're going to do Zoom. Don't do the freebie. You don't want to be trying to race to get calls done in 40 minutes. Okay.
Mhm.
And of course, having a great CRM is key to that. I personally like those pipeline based ones where they're visual. You can literally move people from, step to step. And those ones help tremendously. You have to remember, a lot of times, some of your best salespeople aren't the best at paperwork. They're not the best at some of the detail. So those are some things that the easier you can make it through tech, the better off you are. So
Yeah, I think this is like, to me, one of the most important slides in the whole presentation, because, like I had mentioned earlier, I went through a very well-known agency company out there that supplies people with closers and setters, and I got sold on it, but I was nowhere close to being ready for hiring a salesperson. And what I found out and learned really quickly was, first of all, I wasn't booking enough calls. I mean, you really have to have to to bring on a closer. You got to be booking those, definitely around those 15 at least a week, to be able to support a closer. They're just not going to stick with you. First of all, I mean, maybe those part-time guys, but I feel like that's a difficult thing to do too, because they're probably going to find a full-time job if they're good. Um, and then the offer price point, like you really do need to be at least 5K and up, because, you know, the good ones, the good closers, are not going to be interested in a job that's not can't get them to their goals. So you got to support their goals too. And then getting, just in my experience from just hiring virtual assistants and setting people up with virtual assistants, usually when people hire their own virtual assistants, and the reason they fail is because they don't have their training in place, they don't have their SOPs in place. So they bring somebody in and it's just chaos. There's no structure around what the person's doing, and so it just doesn't work out. So I think this, really understanding this piece is huge. And I know we kind of break down how each of these, one by one. So it's a great slide.
Yeah, I agree. Super important. And at the end of the day, when you do bring somebody on full time, like you said, like, they're in their mind, they have a vision of what's going to happen. And so I think it's really, really important to kind of set those expectations. So if this is the first time, what I found is that, of course, sales reps are people too. So if you're just upfront about it and say, hey, this is the first time my company's hiring a sales rep, we're going to have some bumps and bruises, but if you hang with us, we're committed to this. We really want to make this work. And we'd really like to really, in a way, you're partnering with that sales rep. I mean, the most likely they're probably not actually employees. A lot of times they'll be 1099, that type of thing. So, kind of keep that in mind too. Just setting expectations, being real with people is great principle in life anyway, but
Mm-hmm.
especially with hiring somebody who's depending on this, of course, for their livelihood and to feed their families. So important stuff for sure. So here's actually the basic KPIs, and I just want to be very clear. Like when you're dealing with doing sales, these are probably the top 5 you have to be aware of. But there's actually a lot more detail that you would want to have. Obviously, we don't have a day to go through every little metric, but these are the key ones that I think have the most influence that you should be on top of from day one. Basically, you want to make sure again, you're getting your leads, you get enough leads. How many of those leads convert and create appointments? Of those appointments, how many people are showing up? Of the ones that show up, were they the right fit? And are you actually getting an offer to them because it makes sense to make them an offer? And then how many of those are actually becoming clients and your close rate? And I will say that, every industry is a little different. So you don't want to expect too much. You don't want to settle for too little. So it's really important, again, just to network, depending on your industry, to kind of know some of those numbers. I know, Ron, with all your experience and working with so many, entrepreneurs and helping, gosh, I mean, you've helped hundreds, if not thousands of people teaching and training. You
Mm-hmm.
probably know some of those metrics, but that's the one key is don't, expect something that's not necessarily, not real, because if you do, you're just setting yourself up for failure, but you're also setting up the sales rep. And you don't want to go into a relationship with somebody and then be hiring somebody else, and you don't want to get in that roller coaster where you can't find somebody who wants to stick, right? It's very time consuming and costly to continue to be replacing them. So again, go into it with some real idea of what the true metrics are, and those are the big 5 that you really want to pay attention to. So kind of for fun, I put together just a good example. Like if your goal was to generate, roughly, maybe $500,000, obviously, at least 80% of that, we always want to have a stretch goal, right? But in this particular case, if you are doing marketing and you're generating about 14,000 leads, and again, this is a paid strategy for the most part, could include some other ones, but if you're talking about 14,000 leads at about $10 a lead, you're spending about $140,000 a year for that. And these are some pretty much average, but again, everyone's different, like what the percentage are. But you'd have 10% of the actual leads are booking appointments. You're getting a 50% show rate, which I think is low depending on what you do in the nurturing process, which we'll talk a little bit about later about funnels and nurturing things. Your offer rate, meaning how many of those that come through the pipeline actually makes sense to speak to. And that's, again, pretty important to know. And then what are you actually closing at? Now, if you look at those numbers, they're all very, very conservative. But based on that, with a $7,000, average deal, that would generate, close to $400,000. So, if my goal was to basically hit $1 million, I would simply probably have to double the amount of leads, or I could bring my lead costs down. I could get better appointment percentage, to get better show rate. Like every one of those factors are easily, that's moved a bit by simply doing some extra work. Having a professional setter, for example, can not only increase the appointments, but they can also increase the show rate by nurturing them to get to the appointment. Obviously, the marketing plan and who you're working with, can help tremendously, especially if it's dealing with some warm audience that's been around for a while. That offer rate could go up because you're only speaking to the right people. And of course, your close rate, if you're working with professional, there are a lot of closers out there, a lot of people out there that can do, 15, 20, 30%, especially when you're building value and doing, different types of nurturing to the people that really need to be listening to you, right? So close rate could go up significantly based on that. And then average deal, of course, everybody has a price point. So, but those are some good numbers to kind of think about. Again, those aren't written in stone, but that's kind of a pretty good look at what you could expect kind of starting out, I would think, with a great system in place.
Yeah. And I think I love this slide too, because it also shows you that there's a lot of leverage points to running a business and making money. You could, like you said, you could lower your lead costs, and this would dramatically change the income, the gross income. You could, get a higher booking rate. You could increase your show up rate by 10%, and all of this is going to just dramatically change, the end outcome, the result. So, yeah, that's really cool. And then, really figuring out where the biggest leverage point, easiest leverage point, low hanging fruit in this system is. I know we're talking about sales, but there's a lot of places that you could improve and get a bigger, better result from. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I mean, the one that always jumps out at me, which is pretty consistent, is that show rate. The reality is when they're nurtured properly, and you have a professional setter, or you have a get a sales rep that's reaching out. They're doing some of those extra things, sending that email, sending a video ahead of time. When you actually book the appointment, having a thank you page that really gets people excited about the call. Offering some freebies, and really making it not a sales call. I mean, again, if you are going to sell on the call, like be upfront about, be upfront about it. Like don't lie about it. But the main thing would be is like deliver value during the call, right? And if people know they're going to get value, whether they choose to move forward or not, then the reality is that you're going to have a better show rate. So that show rate is significant. If you add 10% of that, that literally can add, a quick $100,000 to it. The funny one too is the average deal rate. I mean, if you think about it, if you're closing 56 deals and you move from 7,000 to 8,000, you literally just added $56,000 to your revenue. That almost pays for your sales rep, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do is I would really evaluate your offer, and I would evaluate what your price point is. And if there's a way to increase that, price point to an extra $1,000 or $1,500, it will actually pay for your sales rep. And even if it requires you maybe to add a personal one-on-one or a couple one-on-one calls, or maybe add an extra feature or something, but it allows you to bring that number up for your average deal to be at 8,000, 8,500. You just basically found a way to pay for your sales rep without having to actually do anything really different than you're doing now, by simply just adding a little more value to your average deal and raising your prices. So
yeah, a couple of other things I wanted to point out.
Yeah, please.
About these leverage points, since we're kind of focusing on like setters and closers. With your appointment rate, you could increase that if you had a setter like calling all the leads and constantly following up with the leads. That would improve that. The show up rate, like you talked about, an indoctrination sequence when somebody comes in, and like making the setter kind of confirming the appointment. And then the close rate obviously deals with the talent of the actual closer, but also like the follow-up system afterwards.
Yep.
Right.
100%.
So, right. So cool.
Yeah, good stuff, man. So far, we kind of, looking kind of back. I mean, the first step was really to know your numbers, right? Knowing your revenue goals, what your KPIs are, understanding, where you want to be and act as if. So now let's talk a little bit about kind of like what it would take to create a revenue-driven system, focusing a bit on, again, the marketing and sales, and digging a little bit deeper into those. And it really starts first and foremost with, really creating systems and automations, right? So it starts off with having an optimized traffic source. I mean, and that specifically deals with your leads and your offer rate. Are you speaking to the right people, and are the right people being attracted into your world? And of course, the two big strategies, of course, is paid and organic. And we're talking about lead cost, and of course, I just put $10 there because I know if you do paid campaigns just for offering a nice lead mag or something, you typically can be around $10. But when you start thinking about organic, though, and you start reaching out, doing the direct messaging, you start building Facebook groups, you start doing these extra things for the organic side, it can drop that lead cost down really, really fast. And again, if you start saving 20, 30, 40% on your lead costs, you're looking at about really changing the bottom line, or being able to put more money out into the market to get more attention on maybe Facebook ads or Google ads or so forth. So, but optimize traffic, and automating that, it really is a big key for your leads and your offer rate. Next is your optimized funnel, man. This is where so many people, unfortunately, they many times start to create this super complex funnel. This 13 steps how to make. No, just keep it simple. What your goal is to speak to people that are the right people, right? So, your optimized funnel will deal with your leads, and it basically directly will create the appointments, and it affects your offer rate. So you want to optimize that funnel, man. You want to make it simple. There's some different, straight booking funnels. There's a VSL to booking funnel. There's different styles. You got to find the one that's right for your business, but you want to make sure you optimize that. Making sure it moves when they land on it, it goes fast. If you're moving from a Facebook lead, going into VSL, is it quick? Is it being able to play consistently? Is there that 1-2 second lag before it even clicks over? Like, there's so many little things like that you can do, which is really key. So you want to make sure you optimize your traffic, optimize your funnel, and make sure your calendar booking system is super easy. It creates make sure it's an easy interface. Make sure that it sends reminder emails. Again, do some of that indoctrination, some of those different personalized emails to them. Again, that's where a professional setter can come in and really make a difference. I like when the company has a call for the appointment. You have your setter call up and just reminding them. A lot of times you will get voicemail, but even then, leave a great message. Say, we're so excited to meet you. So excited to have you a part of what we're doing. Just want to remind you your appointment's tomorrow at 9. If for any reason you can't make it, we understand, but please make sure you reschedule, whatever else. And if you do get a hold of them, of course, give them that reason to show up. Of course, your CRM. Big fan of CRM, and that close rate directly relates to it because of your nurture and your follow up. And then having some kind of a tracker or pipeline, a lot of times just keeping track of a simple spreadsheet, of how many people come into your world, how many appointments, how many showed, how many of them actually got the offer, and those big metrics. And there are some softwares out there, of course, that will kind of do it for you. But I like to double dip a little bit, kind of use the ones that are in there, but I kind of like those old spreadsheets as well. Really get a chance to visually see, what your numbers are. But you want a system, you want systems, you want automations, and you want to do that and make sure it's really dialed in to optimize, your revenue and to make this sales system work for you.
Cool.
Yeah. So once you kind of have that dialed in, right, you want to go into recruiting and hiring. So where do you find the help? I mean, this is one of the other big questions we get is, how do I find the right salesperson? Like, I don't like sales. I'm not good at sales. I'm tired of doing sales, whatever it might be. Where do I go? Well, first and foremost, believe it or not, you probably have somebody in your network. You just have to let them know. You have to let your people know. It's not uncommon if you've, are in any kind of networking groups, or if you're any kind of masterminds or any of those types of things you're doing, let people know you're looking for some help on the sales side. There are some professional services out there, that you can hire. There's, some experts that already have teams in place, and you can, outsource that and find that. Setters are a little bit easier to find typically than your professional salespeople. But really, I like your network, professional services. There's a couple good out there. Groups on Facebook. There are probably, I don't know, a couple thousand groups that are kind of high ticket closers and these different types of groups that exist, and simple post there, looking for some help on sales, looking for a high ticket closure, whatever it would be. You can go in, they generally let you in fairly easy. And so it's not too hard to become a member of the group, and just let them know what you're looking for. You get a chance to learn quite a bit about that industry and get some networking there. Of course, there are some traditional Indeed and ZipRecruiter paths to that. Depending on your business, it would be key. So I've used Indeed and ZipRecruiter a lot in my solar business. So I would keep that in mind, that you can still use a traditional route. The world has gone remote thanks to COVID. We all have a bit more of a remote scenario, so it's not uncommon to find that on your traditional sites. And then, of course, I know, Ron, you do a little bit of that. We can help somebody if they're the right fit. We might know of some people. I think that's one of the best parts about networking. And I know you're always gracious with helping people, just simply for the fact of helping. But that's how you basically go through the recruiting and hiring. Those are probably your top 5 ways to do it.
Yeah.
There's one bonus I'd like to add too, which I didn't put on the slide, which is, there's a good chance you have one of your successful students. So if you're a coach and you've had somebody go through your system, right, and depending on what you do, and they had a lot of success and they become one of your best raving fans, a lot of times they'd be a great salesperson for you, because they know your program, they believe in it, and they are, somebody who's going to go out there and really be able to be, a shining light into the world to say, hey, like I wasn't like just somebody who needed a job. I'm somebody who actually went through the program. I loved it so much, and I had a chance to work with the company. So that's another, kind of a tip that you might have them in your own network from a standpoint of potentially a client that you had at one point that did really well, that is good in sales. So keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, I want to circle back on this one. So, and I think the important thing is I want to make sure that people remember this and think about this is you got to have that house in order before you even start thinking about this. A lot of people, a lot of times, and I'm guilty of this, think that, hey, I want to get I don't want to take sales calls anymore. I'm just going to go hire a closer. But then you don't have anything in place to help that person be successful. It's just not going to work. You have to have that stuff in place. And, you might have to find a service that helps you to get that stuff in place. But you need to really take a good look at what you have set up and ask yourself, are you really prepared to bring on a closer and make them and help them be successful? So before you do any recruiting, definitely think about that piece.
Yeah, well, that's why, again, that house order is key. I'm glad you brought it up because, again, that, for somebody who's been on the other side of, being on the sales side and working, with some companies and, placing people and stuff like that, that is one of the struggles, because if you aren't ready for them, you bring them in, it really can create a lot of stress for yourself because then you're scrambling for things, you're trying to throw stuff together last minute. And then the other part is you're not going to have the results you want. I mean, at the end of the day, you're bringing on a closer to increase that close percentage, to increase the amount of revenue. And if it's not prepared properly, you're literally going to cost yourself, sales, cost yourself revenue, because there's a good chance if you're not prepared for them, they're not going to be able to close much because they haven't done all the training, which really the next slide's all about. It's about really onboarding. Like, what do you do once you find somebody or you're considering, hiring somebody? Like, what would you need to have ready to bring them on? And it's really about them understanding your entire, your world, right? I like the idea of doing some Loom videos of your product, maybe some live Zoom training, like jump on with a potential sales rep, and, get a chance to like just share with them what your program's about. I mean, at the end of the day, they should be watching and learning your content, your courses, any of your programs. If you do have some events, whether they're past or coming up, I would highly recommend them participate so they really understand the product. And it's not as much because they need to understand every detail of the product, because in sales, it's not as much about selling, all the features or the benefits. It's really about knowing whether or not the client is the right fit for the company and the company is the right fit for the client. And so the more they know about the business, the more they understand the business, what the results can be, just the better off they're going to do. And if you do have some past sales calls that have been recorded, have them listen to them. I mean, that's one of those things that it's not the most fun as a sales rep, but any professional salesperson wants to know what has been working in the past, what hasn't worked in the past, so that they can, become effective. Because again, on a commission only basis, they only get paid if there's a sale. So you want to set them up for success, and ultimately you want the success as the owner of the business. So those are, three things you can do to really, plan and prepare, and don't take that lightly. A little tip here too: if you do have somebody who's you think about hiring, and if they're kind of maybe questioning some of this, like listening to sales calls, or they're not really engaging on listening to the content, or they're not want to go through the courses, I'd kind of wonder about them if they're the right fit. And the reason I say that is because I would want to know as a salesperson everything I can so that I could be prepared to overcome any of the hesitations a potential buyer would have. And would know that is knowing how great the program is and knowing how awesome the course is, or what the service is. If you're doing a marketing agency, what kind of results have they been getting for people? I mean, those are key elements of that. So, make sure you help them tremendously with the onboarding process to get them really geared up with what you do, as a company.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what you do in the first 30 days, man. Days 1 through 10 is you're just going to prepare them to take calls. So make sure they understand who your client is, who is your ideal client, what do they look like, if there's demographics, psychographics, those types of things. Make sure they understand your product offerings. You want to make sure that they, again, attend events, those type of things. And then if you do have SOPs, because you should have some sales frameworks. I don't necessarily know, scripts are one thing. Be careful with scripts. Sometimes can hold a very qualified salesperson salesperson in a box, but I prefer frameworks. Make sure they understand and have their tech stack done. They know how to operate it well. Make sure that if there's any contracts that need to go out for somebody to sign, that they understand how to do them. There's nothing worse than getting somebody to say yes and then not knowing what to do once they say yes, right? And then one of the key things is a disposition of the call. So sales rep gets on a call, make sure they understand the process. If the person is either needing to think about it or they literally just won't move forward and it requires a follow-up, because there are some times when calls need 2 calls or 3 calls to quote close them, simply because of the complexity of the product or maybe the price of the product. So make sure that they have a good system for the follow-up. They're disposition that call. They've got systems set up to do reminders and that type of thing. And then I would also have have them listen to those past calls and do some role play. That's a really big help when you bring on a new salesperson, is to let them role play with either the existing sales reps you have and or the owner. At this point it's probably the owner. And I would say, as the owner, be a little bit of a challenging individual on that role play, right? Sharpen their skills, and then make sure that the sales rep, can handle those. And then what they struggle with, help them. I mean, ultimately, the more you help them, the more they're going to help your business. Once those first 10 days are done, I believe at that point, you can do that comfortably in 10 days. And then by day 11, you can have them start taking calls. And I'm just going to tell you, the key to this, after every call, if you can have a chance to listen to it and or do a transcription, even if you're not sure what to listen to make sure they're not promising something that doesn't exist, find out what they might be stumbling at, where they're having their hangups, where their choke points are, so that you can help them. Because if they get hung up on the same thing, like simple questions, like that would be pretty obvious in your program, then they might need to kind of relearn your program again, and you can help them fix those things easy. So you want to make sure you do that feedback loop. So typically, not that you have to do every call, but if they're doing 3 or 4 calls, you should be wanting to speak to them. They should be wanting to speak to you and say, hey, this person said this, how would I handle that? Or what would be my answer? So get that feedback loop going. And I'll tell you, Ron, about 30 days and probably about 20 to 30 calls is going to be a pretty good indication of whether the person's the right fit. Now, if they're extremely professional, they do everything right, maybe it doesn't necessarily mean that they have closed the deal or haven't closed the deal, but you're going to know the quality of the person based on how they acted in those first 30 days. If they're taking those 10 days really serious, they know things about the product, and you could quiz them on it or ask them questions and they know all the answers. They're on calls, they sound professional, they're showing up on time. Whether they've had a couple sales or no sales, you can at least make a good judgment whether or not they're the right fit. If they are the right fit, of course, do what you can to get them better, right? And if they're not the right fit, it's probably a good point to, thank them for their opportunity, thank them for their time, but don't stay too long with somebody, because it's obviously costing you money, it's costing you potential revenue. But 30 days is a pretty good time frame, and like I said, probably about 20 to 30 calls is a good mark. So kind of keep that in mind. But those are what I would do in the first 30 days.
Okay.
As far as the performance, man, it's pretty straightforward. What gets measured gets improved. So make sure that if you do have sales targets and some of the things we're speaking about earlier about your lead costs, your marketing, what your basically your close rate is compared to show rates, and keeping all that data is important. You can only control what you can be controlled, right? So there's some things you can't necessarily control on the front end, but there are some things you control on the back end. What I mean by that is, if you have a great rep, you can tell they're just really professional. They might not have all the numbers yet, but they're doing the follow-up, they're asking the right questions, and they're doing that. There's still some hope there, right? But the numbers typically don't lie. I mean, if you hire a setter and you're getting a 5% show rate, 10% show rate, you got to kind of ask yourself, there's something probably kind of funny about that. So it's good to keep the data, measure them, monitor them, and you want to do that, obviously look at it daily, and then, weekly, monthly, and then you want to kind of keep track of that stuff. So again, really important to take that kind of serious.
Yeah. And then also, back to that point, you can figure out where the bottlenecks are in the system. So, show rate's low, then something's wrong with from the time they book. Well, it could be also the quality of the lead, but also from the time they book to the time that they get on the call. There's lots of things that you could probably do in that time period to improve that show up rate. If the offer rate is really low, then we're getting the wrong people on the call. And then if the close rate, if they're offering a high amount, but they're not closing, then it's probably, it might be with something to do with the actual skill and talent of the closer, right? So
100%.
yeah, so that's very important to be tracking all that stuff so you can figure out where the bottleneck is, and then experiment with ways on fixing that bottleneck.
Yeah, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because like one of the things that we found in taking tens of thousands of calls a year is that the reality is the time from when they book it to the actual call. If it's more than 72 hours, you're going to see a significant decline, right? So if you're having a setter that's saying, setting something 5 days, 8 days, 10 days out, and then you're wondering why they're not showing up, you can tell right there. I mean, most people, unfortunately, we live in a pretty busy life in general. And so, if they're not really booking a call and taking that call in the first couple of days, and I'd love to see 48 hours at most, a lot of times you're going to see that show rate. So again, that's why you monitor. That's why you pay attention. I mean, the data matters. And, again, every time you're spending $10 or whatever the number is, $5, $8, whatever it is per lead, eventually you'll figure out what you're paying per appointment, what you're paying per show. And when you start figuring that out and you start seeing those numbers climb, it get kind of scary. So you want to keep track of all that kind of stuff. So those are, again, what gets measured gets improved. The other part is you want to keep some, ongoing support and coaching. When you find the right person to get past those first 30 days, they're doing a good job for you. There are, you do want to listen to some calls occasionally. Just make sure that, again, they're keeping track. I like to believe in the good of humanity, that their intentions are good, but you want to make sure they are selling the program that you actually designed. They're not kind of creating their own program for you. You can transcribe the calls today with AI and the different technology. So, you don't necessarily have to listen to them all, but you can really nowadays have AI print this thing out. You can actually type in certain words; it'll search it all out for you. So if they're saying the same type of thing, too often, I mean, there's lots of different things to do on that. Again, role play. If you do get to a point you have 2-3 reps, make them role play. And I'll tell you, a lot of reps don't like that, and they're kind of like they just don't enjoy it. The reality is, most athletes don't really enjoy the practice process. They'd rather show up on game day, but they got to practice, right?
Mhm.
And so make sure you do that. Invest the time in the resources. I know earlier you mentioned that you're not a huge fan of sales. You prefer not to do it. It's not your thing, and that's great. Then what I'd recommend is, find some of the best outside training that there is, right? And invest in that rep. If they've proven to you, they've been with you for a few months, they're making sales, they're driving some good numbers, ask them. They typically will know what are some different training or events or things that they've looked into in the past that they would like to do. And there's a lot of great systems out there. Don't be afraid to invest in a rep, or invest in a program that allows you to, get your reps, that rep really good, or maybe even any reps in the future as you grow. And then one of my favorite things to consider is a customer feedback loop. And what I mean by that is making sure that when your sales rep has a call, that they are speaking to the right person, and that whatever they were expecting on the sales call is basically directly tied to what the promises were in the marketing. So for example, if you're marketing this idea of we do a 30-day blueprint, make sure your sales rep is doing a 30-day blueprint, right? Because if a customer doesn't, if they feel that there's not this congruence between what the marketing promise was and what the booking promise was and the sales promise, you could create some issues. So make sure you keep those in alignment. And that's best to be done with, again, just having great communication between your sales reps, and then whoever's doing your marketing, or at least use the owner, and then the make sure the marketing. Because I know a lot of people outsource marketing, which makes sense. Let the pros do it. And so if you're outsourcing marketing, outsourcing sales, you got to make sure that somewhere they're connected and everything's being done congruently. So important stuff there. Any questions on ongoing support coaching?
No, I think that's pretty
Cool.
straightforward.
Awesome. And I just had a couple final bonus thoughts I just want to throw in there. Guys, make sure from a legal and compliance considerations, you keep it in mind. When you do gather people's information, there are some rules and some laws to that. Make sure your sales reps are following that. Don't be having them unintentionally, be doing any kind of data breach stuff or having passwords that are easy to copy. Keep all that in mind. I mean, you don't want to get in trouble, your business get in trouble. Not here to scare you guys, but there are situations where, especially if you're using, some remote setters and things, there's so many easy ways to protect all that. Make sure, again, your marketing, your sales are in alignment, because at the end of the day, a sales rep, they're not a magician. You can't expect them to, speak to somebody who's interested in learning, agriculture, and try to sell them a high coaching program, on, something completely unrelated, like, walk on the moon, whatever it would be. They've got to have alignment, right? Always be positive. One of the things I'd recommend is, be mindful of the fact that, salespeople are human. They're going to have some of their off moments. They're going to have some great moments. And so when you can tell they're not themselves, sometimes you kind of a little bit of a counselor, you got to go in, have the conversations, ask them what you can do, that type of thing. And, a lot of it comes down to timing. Sometimes, they might have made a mistake with their schedule, and they, get frantic and those type of things. Also, don't try not to have them book back to back to back to back to back, give them a break, and when they do bring up some things, just, get a chance to listen to it. Again, they are humans, even though sometimes salespeople are a little bit funny to deal with. They still have some of those human characteristics, and when they is that little stressful that they're feeling, they'll have a tendency to take it out on you. I'll just tell you right now, they'll blame everybody else except themselves sometimes. But I know it's kind of a human thing, but I know salespeople probably do a little more. So try to keep it positive, keep a great sales culture. When they're having a downtime, give them reassurance that you're there to help them, that you're going to help build them up, give them the skills that they need, and you're going to grow them. Adapt them, and make sure you're adaptable. I mean, if you have an offer, guys, and it's not converting, even though you might think it's amazing, don't blame it on your closer. It really could be your offer needs to be revised. So if they're coming, letting you know, hey, if we added this feature, this is what people are asking for, or if we, gave a, 2-week, bonus to do X, Y, Z, if they're bringing you some feedback they're consistently hearing, I would highly recommend to consider that, because you might think your offer is amazing, but the feedback through the sales loop, it might be a little bit different. Again, that's a customer feedback loop, making sure that, they're listening and speaking to the customers. And if they're expecting something different, make sure you understand they're the ones speaking to your potential clients. So they're going to have some invaluable information. So make sure you really do that. And aside from that, I mean, at this point, we've kind of gone through, know your numbers, revenue, KPIs, all that. I mean, bottom line is you got to go do it, guys. If you have been thinking about getting a closer, do what you need to do to make it happen. Because one of the things that's hard as a business owner, if you're not good in sales, is if you're an amazing coach and you help people maybe in the nutrition space, think about this. You might be the best dietitian in the world, but you're going horrible at sales. You're literally doing a disservice to everybody out there by you not hiring a professional to do what they do best, so you can do what you do best. So I would encourage you to get everything in order, get your house in order, and consider bringing on a professional, sales rep. It absolutely will help blow up your business. So go make it happen, execute it. And with that, I mean, any other questions? And I guess we can maybe open them up to those that are live, or if there are any questions, I guess.
Sure. Does anybody drop any questions you guys might have for Jeff or myself into the comments if y'all have any? And just to loop back into some of the preparatory stuff that you need to have for your closer. First of all, you need to be able to provide them enough leads. So how are you going to do that? Think about, your current client acquisition system, your current lead gen. How many appointments are you getting right now? And, if you're not getting enough, obviously you need to find a system that's going to help you to do that. We obviously use the Facebook groups as our funnel, and that generates a lot of appointments and kind of drives our business. So that's one opportunity to do it. Running ads, if you've got a budget for ads, is a great way to generate more appointments. Then you got to think about also hiring, a VA DM outreach, do an outreach for you. Content marketing is a great way to generate leads and appointments. Then you got to think about your offer. Are you charging enough for your offer? Okay. So if you're not, and you feel kind of awkward or uncomfortable charging enough for your offer, then you got to look back at how you can add more value to your offer. We have a program that can help you to do that. If you're interested in that, let us know. But that's kind of that's actually probably the number one thing you need to be thinking about is your offer. You got to have a good offer, and especially if you want to charge high ticket prices. So how can you pack that thing with so much value that you now feel comfortable and confident when you're charging those high ticket prices? Then you got to find your client acquisition system. Next thing, you got to have a system in place, you know, the technology and the automations and systems in place to, you know, drive your leads to when they come into the system, to nurture those leads to book calls. Once they book calls, to actually make sure that they show up. Okay. So that's the system. And then also be tracking all of that. And then once you've got that stuff in place, you really need to be creating like SOPs and training around how you're moving people through that process, how you're taking those calls, so that you can be ready to start bringing on a closer. So I think that's kind of the highlights and the summary of what we talked about for preparing for bringing on a closer. But I want to just drive that home, because I hired somebody for $15,000 and didn't even get the closer at the end of it, because I got sold on something that I really wasn't ready for. So, does anybody have any questions? All right. I'm not seeing any questions coming in. So, do you have anything else you'd like to add, Jeff, before we jump off?
Yeah, I would just say, I know we went through a lot of material. We did a lot of things. It's not as complicated as it seems. It's really just about having some systems, automations, making things happen, and just being committed to it. If you're really committed to your business, like, make sure you commit to sales. I mean, you got to have marketing, got to have sales. And I know that you work with a lot of coaches, and I do as well. And I can tell you, most of my private clients, what it all boils down to is they love coaching, and they didn't get into coaching to become masters at marketing and masters at sales and those type of things. They just simply want to help people get results. So what I would say is, it's a lot easier than you think. I'm sure if they reach out to you, we can somehow connect with them, help them, if nothing else, just evaluate what they would need to do next to get ready for bringing on a closer, bringing on a sales rep or setter. I'm more than happy to help out, any way I can, any clients you have that just even need some direction, because I think that's the scary thing, is a lot of people want to do it. They just don't even know the next step. So it's hard to build, in an hour's time, an entire, sales ecosystem and every step along the way. But it is easier than you think. You just probably need a little bit of help, and we all need help at some point with what we do. So don't be afraid, reach out, and I'm happy, Ron, to help any way I can, and any clients that just need some direction, that type of thing. So
yeah, anybody that's interested in talking to Jeff or myself about some of this stuff, and kind of taking a look at what you're currently doing, and seeing how you can prepare to do something like this, just drop like help in the comments, whether you're watching this live or on the replay, and we'll definitely get back to you, and we'll see if we can get something on the books and get you scheduled, and take a look at what you're doing, so we can see if we can help you. So I guess that we don't have any questions, so I guess we're going to end it for the day. Thank y'all for showing up. Jeff, thank you for doing this.
absolutely, man.
We'll see y'all next week. We'll actually be talking about a very similar thing. We're going to talk about how you can, generate 20K plus. And this time we're going to be talking about doing it one to many. So we'll be focusing on probably challenges next week. So be sure to tune in for next week, and we will see y'all next time. Thanks, guys.